We'll get started. Good morning. The Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Very kind of you. Our plan this morning was to resume our study in 2 Kings, and Pastor Phil was going to preach on chapter 12 of 2 Kings, as you know, but the elders thought it appropriate to set that aside for a week in light of the tragedy in our church family that occurred on Friday. Some of you knew Jeremy really well. You'd known him for years, even decades, and this was particularly hard for you. Others have known Jeremy a shorter period of time, but it really didn't take long to know what a special person he was, and we just miss him a lot. I was one of about a dozen guys who got to spend the whole Saturday with him, not yesterday, but the previous Saturday, and he made it. Ask any of the guys that were there. Jeremy just made it fun and special, and just a really, really neat guy. None of us had any idea that it would be our last time with him. So our church is hurting today, and for me, and maybe for some others, it doesn't even feel real. It's kind of surreal in a way. We didn't have any time to prepare for this, and so now the question is, what now? How do we react to something like this? And maybe there's something else in your life, tragedy or loss, something that you're mourning, and so the question is, what do we do, and how do we respond? And I'm going to speak to that this morning, not drawing from my own wisdom, what little wisdom there is to draw from, but from the wisdom of God revealed to us in His Word. And the first thing I think we need to observe is that mourning and grief are appropriate in times like these. It would be unnatural for us in the midst of a tragedy not to mourn. The Bible acknowledges the appropriateness of mourning and grieving in all kinds of circumstances, not the least of which is death. And Paul addressed this subject of losing fellow Christians in 1 Thessalonians 4. He writes, "Brothers, we do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep, or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope." So he doesn't say, don't grieve. You shouldn't be grieving. After all, you're Christians, and Christians are supposed to be happy all the time. You're supposed to be smiling. He doesn't say that. He assumes that we're going to grieve because we're human. And he says that our grieving should look different than the world's grieving. And here's why. He continues, "We believe that Jesus died and rose again. And so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in Him." And so the clear implication is that upon death, their spirits would go to be with Jesus. And then he goes on to explain that the living will be rejoined with the departed saints and with Jesus. And then he concludes here, "Therefore, encourage each other with these words." And so there are not just words of encouragement that we can offer one another, but true words. We're not just fooling ourselves and trying to feel better, but true words of encouragement for those who like us in this moment, really feel that sting, that separation of death. Secondly, I want to remind us all to look to Christ for comfort. And that's a common thing, I think, to say and to hear in moments like these, but I don't offer it as a cliche. I offer this really as sound biblical counsel that should be acted upon by those who grieve. To Christians in very difficult situations, Peter wrote this, and we've been studying the Peter's letter, his first letter, the last few weeks. But we didn't come across this verse in chapter 5, verse 7, where he writes, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." I think some other translations say, "Cast all your cares on him because he cares for you." He really does. Those aren't just words that we comfort ourselves with. It was Jesus himself who preached, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Who does the comforting? I don't know that I have ever felt more helpless than I did the other night when I was trying to offer comfort to Jeremy's family in the midst of their grief and their sorrow. I'm thankful that those who mourn don't depend on my ability or that of any other human being to bring comfort. We're just not up to the task so often. In our pain and in our grief, we call out to the one whom Paul refers to as the God of all comfort. Just as the psalmist prayed, "Be merciful to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and my body with grief." God listens to that kind of prayer. God hears us in our darkest hour. He's actually with us. He is our ever-present help. Now, even as we go to the Lord for comfort in a moment like this, when we've lost someone who is very precious and dear to us, I think it's also a time for us to take heed, a time for us to reflect upon and consider the brevity of life. And the scriptures are realistic about this. The scriptures don't gloss over this reality. James writes, "Now listen, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money.' Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, 'If it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that.' As it is, you boast and brag, and all such boasting is evil." And I wonder if James was thinking about Proverbs 27, verse 1, which reads, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth." We don't know. The brevity of life is a recurring theme in the Bible, especially in the book of Psalms. And I was just reading the Psalms yesterday, and it struck me just how many places give us this reminder. And maybe we get this reminder over and over and over because we need it, because we forget. We tend to just, maybe I think they call that the normalcy bias. It's life goes on. But Psalm 39, "Show me, O Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting is my life. You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Each man's life is but a breath." Psalm 90 says, "The length of our days is 70 years, or 80, if we have the strength. Yet their span is trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass, and we fly away." Psalm 103, As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, but the wind blows over it and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. All of these passages are getting at the same thing. Psalm 144, man is like a breath. His days are like a fleeting shadow. These metaphors are powerful. A morning mist that appears for a little while. You know, you wake up and you look out the window and there's that mist, and you go and you make your coffee and come back and it's gone. Our lives are like grass. The sun hits it, it dries up, it's gone. Our lives are like a single breath, over before we know it. The word says that our lives are like a shadow. You know, it was just here. What happened to it? When we see life cut short, it should be a reminder to us all, a reminder that we need, that our days are few and fleeting, and that leads me to this. In light of the brevity of life, we need to make the most of our days. And the brevity of life is a fact that's staring us in the face right now, I think a lot of us. And so what do we do with that fact? Do we just, oh well, wish it could be longer? Or do we live in light of that fact? And again, it sounds cliche. I'm not offering you a cliche. I'm pleading with you, and I'm reminding myself that every day, each day, we need to get up and realize that we're only here for a short time. Paul wrote to the believers in Ephesus, and he said, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. And I think a lot of people in the world would say, oh yeah, well, we agree with that. You want to make the most of your life, you know, YOLO, right? You only live once. But we're not talking about a bucket list. We're not talking about, you know, I've always wanted to skydive, and so I'm going to skydive before I die, or I swim with the dolphins, or whatever it is, get a selfie with the Eiffel Tower in the background. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about bigger things, huge, monumental, eternal things, like reading a story to your granddaughter, or having coffee with a friend. Huge, monumental things, and I'm not being facetious here. Things like looking your spouse in the eye and saying, I love you, I'm so thankful for you. Those things like setting our pride aside and giving a long overdue sorry. I don't think that anyone in their right mind lays there on their deathbed and says, I never got to skydive. I don't know, maybe somebody does. But how many people have regrets about their relationships, thinking that, oh, I had so much time, and then all that time runs out. We're talking about conscious decisions to prioritize relationships. Okay, that's the only thing that's lasting on this planet. Paul wrote, for we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And how often do we think of it that way? That God actually prepared good works. They're sitting there waiting for us, if we will take them, if we'll take those opportunities. And that's why I think in the same letter, Paul wrote this, be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children, and listen to this, and live a life of love. So if life is really short, then I should be asking, if this is really short, how do I live a life of love, the life of love that I'm called to live? And he continues, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us. And I know we keep coming back to this. It seems like at Aletheia we've been talking about this a lot. I don't know that we can talk about it too much, because as sinners, we wake up every morning, we want to serve ourselves. That's me. I hate to admit that, but I'm just so self-oriented. And I think we just have to keep coming back to what the scriptures say about this. The way to real life is death, dying to myself, dying to my interests, dying to the things that I want, and through that finding real life, really living. Jesus said it's more blessed to give than to receive. And the question for us as we look at this fleeting life is, if we structure our life that way, if we really believe that, is that real life? Did Jesus know what he was doing when he came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many? Did he really know the way to life? And can I trust that? So life is short. Make the most of it each day by choosing to live a life of love. It has only been a day and a half since we lost Jeremy, and I think for a lot of us, this is just still really raw, still taking it in. Let me remind you in the words of Psalm 34, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. He's close. My flesh and my heart may fail, Psalm 73, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. And finally, a passage from Romans 8 that I think you are familiar with, but one that we all need to hear again and again. Paul writes to a broken world. He writes, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed, for the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints in accordance with God's will. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Do you believe that? Because of Jesus' death on the cross, because of his victory over the grave, we can have joy, even in the midst of a great tragedy like the one that we experienced, confident that our brother Jeremy is with him. God will work for the good of those who love him, those who miss our brother in this temporary time of separation. May that God of comfort and bless you today. Thank you for listening.